and welcome to this episode of the Making It in Asheville podcast. On this podcast, we talk with local Asheville makers, business owners, community members, ask them what they are making and how they are making it in Asheville. And in this episode, this is our very first live and in-person episode since way back. Early 2020, pre-pandemic. It is wonderful to be here. And where exactly are we? We're going to get into it. But I will just say, I just took a tour of the Wrong Way. Let's get the whole name out. Wrong Way.
River Lodge. And Cabins.
Which is, I'm going to use a couple buzzwords and we're going to define them all. Here with the two founders, creators, owners, Shelton and Joe. And I'm excited by all of the things I've seen, all of the things I've heard. You likely have heard some things about the Wrong Way, Riverside Lodge, and Cabins. But the things that are standing out to me so far is this idea of scapulation. Did I use it right? Cool.
Absolutely.
And then how sustainability has showed up in every room that we've walked into, every piece of wood that I've stepped on, every handrail that I've touched. So quickly, I would love to just give you both the floor, introduce yourselves, introduce Wrong Way, and then we'll get into some of these details.
Right on, Tony. I'm going to dive in first. I'm Shelton Steele. Tony and I have known each other for a while. For the listeners out there, just a little background color. I've been courting Tony for a podcast for a while now. But, to Tony's credit, he basically said, hey, you got to have a business before we're going to talk. So we have a business
I love that. A very real business. And for just a little additional, it's been so exciting, Shelton, to watch this from afar through all the craziness of the last several years. And to be here today, no kidding, like I have goosebumps. This is a execution on a wild idea that you talked about. I want to say maybe the last couple months of 2019.
Yeah, 2018. We were teaching classes at the Chop Shop.
Right, and so when was this an idea on a notebook?
2018.
2018. Holy smokes! So even earlier. Cool. Shelton, so excited to have you on the podcast finally.
Thanks.
And Joe, we got to meet today.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. Joe Balkin, longtime friend of Shelton's, current business partner.
Oh, current business partner.
Co-owner.
See in the future.
Wrong Way, River Lodge, and Cabins. But I'm focused on kind of the operations, the technology, running this ship now that we've built it. And I spent the last 19, 20 years in corporate America.
Wow.
Used COVID as a bit of a smoke screen to transition to something that is our own and a little bit more outdoor focused and local focused. And we've just had a blast bringing this to reality.
And I think it's so bringing it into reality. So we've had a lot of guests on the podcast at this point. And this is, at least for me, pretty exciting because this is one of the first businesses that I've got to see since it was a concept, since Shelton, you were like talking about like, hey, we have this idea, or I found this land. I think that there's something here and I'm going to start pitching it. To take an idea, right, to take a service business from idea to execution, not that remarkable. Cool, exciting. I'd love to talk about it. To take a concept that requires acreage, that needs to be, manipulated, like humanity overwhelming this hillside, preparing for nature's floods on this riverside. Like there's a level of complexity. This is three-dimensional chess. This is not just we started a business.
Right.
And so I have some notes in front of me. I have a map. There are 13 standard cabin units, 3 deluxe cabins. There's a river lodge that we're in today that is multi-floors. There is a lot going on here. Tell us a little bit about what's going on here. So where are we? What is Wrong Way, Riverside, lodging cabins.
I'm gonna let Joe field that one. If I will give you real quick the kind of timeline, because I think
Awesome.
that's something to work backwards from. So we talked about 2018. That was kind of where this concept came to life. There was a 55-acre parcel of land over off of Hominy Creek, and I was camping out there with a friend of mine. We put our kids to bed, and we had what I call a brown liquor brainstorming session around the campfire. And the idea was, why can't you camp or stay alongside the French Broad River in this area? Why there was this disjunction? Like, why does an Asheville, which has this outdoor personality, have a place to stay that represents that or reflects that personality? And so I started chasing that big piece of property, and over the course of a year, that kind of all fell apart. So the part that you heard about in 2019 was that 55-acre tract of land, and then as that kind of faded, I went back out to hear the developer that was putting in the apartment complex out there give a walk around for the neighborhoods, and I walked with Hartwell Carson, and he kind of asked some questions about, hey, if you had gotten this property, what would you have done? And I kind of revisited all these ideas, and I left that meeting and felt like, holy shit, like I'm really excited still.
Yeah.
It's still there. And I drove from that meeting over here to the dirt that we're sitting on now, which was a 2.2 acre parcel of land. And it was all woods. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's on Amboy Road, which is in, the river corridor, kind of on the backside of what we call the east-west Asheville neighborhood. So on the east side of our property is the climbing gym. It's now called Cultivate Climbing. And on the west side is the Evelyn oil plant. So I walked through the property and kind of bushwhacked up to the top of it and realized that there were some elevation changes, and the view
Meaningful.
that you see today, was a pretty significant view. And so I put it under contract. Let's see, in 2020, January of 2020, and Joe and I finished a soccer season at the end of 2020. Ended 2019, and we started kicking around this idea, soccer, pun intended. And we realized that we were both kind of in a place in life where we needed it.
Yeah.
And that it fit. And, while our kind of connection came off of the soccer field, we both have river backgrounds.
Yeah.
And we felt, Joe's kind of a systems person. That's what he's good at. And he had an Airbnb at the time, and I had an Airbnb at the time. And so there was some familiarity. Don't get me wrong. That has nothing to do with
the scale is completely different.
Yeah. But over the course of 2020, we were under contract, and that was COVID. And so that COVID was actually a blessing for our project because it allowed us to continually ask for more time and due diligence. And so the idea was, over the course of that year, we understood what it cost to build the walls that we're going to talk about, what it cost to build the cabins, what it cost to build a lodge, the stormwater management system, along with like all the, will the city let you do it the way that we're proposing to do it?
Important questions.
Yeah, really key questions before you own the land and you're pregnant. So the end of December 2020, Joe and I closed on the land. We have a tradition where we go eat pizza and drink a beer. So we had a beer and celebrated that. And then, May 2021 is when we started pushing dirt.
Wow.
And then we completed construction on August the 27th, 2022.
Wow. And we're sitting here mid-ish October of 2022. So there are at least a couple, let's say, wrinkles that I'm sure you have ironed out, right? We haven't just opened. The paint is still fresh, right? But it doesn't smell like it's newly painted, right? So we're in this place in the early days, and it is incredibly exciting to be here. And it is also so clear that there was intention and let's just say, there was intention with every decision. There's intention with everything that I've seen and heard you discuss so far. And so I'll kick it to you, Joe. Talk about some of the parts, I guess, in the early versions of this story that maybe stand out, because we have a great timeline from 2018 to now.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, we've had to figure out how to operate this ship. It's very different than your typical lodging. We kind of have adopted the wrong way name
Yeah.
in different ways. And one of them is how we approach traditional concepts. We are not your traditional campground. We're an urban cabin campground, and that is kind of reflected in the location that we are, the amenities that we offer. But it has been an interesting journey to learn how to operate something that you can't find anywhere else.
Yeah.
So, from the laundry that we've had to implement to the cleaning to operating a river lodge and the food and beverage program. I think Shelton, you mentioned that we bought 2.2 acres, but we sold off a portion of that.
Oh, wow.
And so we're left with, I think, a little over 1.8 acres.
Yeah.
On that 1.8 acres, we've got 16 A-frame cabins.
Yeah.
We've got a river lodge with an event space, the conference room that we're in right now, a canteen, as we call it, which has essentially a cafe, bar, lounge area, retail space. I think when we describe what we have here on this 1.8 acres to folks that haven't been here, they think that, we might have 20 acres or something along those lines. So this business, as we were going through planning and design, was an exercise in space utilization. Every inch counted. Every inch had to be designed around. And that continued into operations. Where's the storage? Where's the cleaning cart go when you close down?
Right.
All these things that you didn't think of, we didn't have time to think of when we were creating the place, now have come into full focus. And it's always going to be a challenge operating a business like this on 1.8 acres, but it also forces us to be really intentional about those choices. It's almost like living in a tiny house. You have to be really intentional about what you bring into it. And that's the same way we have to operate. We don't have a dumpster on the property. And that forces us to make choices about what packaging is used on the retail products that we sell and the things that we put in the cabins. The cabins, we call them zero landfill cabins because all of the products that are in there, all the amenities that are in there, the packaging has compostable materials. So we have a commercial composting program that when we turn over the cabins, that packaging gets put through our commercially composted program, and we don't put anything into the landfill. So
it's exceptional.
I guess that's a long way to say that we're still learning how to operate this thing, but at the core of everything is our values of sustainability and space utilization in the proper way.
So there are a couple of things that came up as you talked through that, and one of them is your name, wrong way, right? So I love what you pointed to, which is the idea that perhaps wrong way has something to do with just not the conventional way. So if there is a conventional way, maybe I'm sure you guys would have some stories of, no, we actually did a couple things the wrong way, and we learned. But it does seem
no, that's not true, is it?
It does seem to be that there is very intentional zagging where others have zigged. You pointed to the idea of a zero waste lodge, and so we went into both the deluxe and a standard cabin, and just looking around from memory, I remember reclaimed wood from the space. I remember zero. There was nothing that had packaging. The garbage bags are compostable. Right. Everything to the final last details seem so intentional, and I keep coming back to that word. And so when thinking about the name, is that it, or is like, you know, Amboy on one at the very end is kind of like it's a one way. You're coming off the highway, and so so you can't go that way. You can't go all the way down.
I haven't heard that one.
That was one of the guesses.
the reference.
Yeah. I mean, the person that kind of glued it together for us is a guy named Eric Piper, who's up on the top of the hill here. You know, we're in east-west Asheville. Like I said, we're on the French Broad River. There's a big bend. The river kind of makes it's an oxbow as it turns back through the River Arts District, and the neighborhood that sits up above wrong way in this river corridor is east-west Asheville, which is counterintuitive and goofy. But Eric Piper has a company called Homestead, and he does branding and just literally one of the most creative people I've ever met. Shout out to Eric. And we engaged Eric to help us kind of breathe life into not only our brand but our identity. And Joe threw the wrong way words up on the board one evening around a campfire. All of our brainstorming sessions were around a campfire. So we're really trying to live into.
I have you TM'd with brown liquor brainstorms.
Right. Yeah.
That's a TM Shelton Steele for the rest of my life.
Those are beer brainstorms.
Okay.
They tend to be less self-destructive. But Joe threw the word up on the board, and that was one of his river guide stories.
Yeah. So in my very distant past, I was a whitewater rafting guide on the French Broad, actually, and one of the stories that we would tell is that the French Broad River is one of 3 rivers in the world, along with the Nile, that flows from south to north, which is
the wrong way.
The wrong way.
There you go. Okay.
Now, a portion of that story is true. You know, it does flow from the south to the north, but it's not one of 3 rivers in the world. But you know, it's still very kind of fantastical.
Right.
And,
that's the if you like the ride to mythological story.
Yeah. So, it was just one of those terms, along with many others, that we tried to tie to the French Broad River because of not only our history on rivers, but our proximity to the river. And honestly, we want to reinforce kind of the river life culture here at the property. So any way we can do that, whether it be theming or branding or name, this conference room is called the Boardroom, after our love of stand-up paddleboarding, and the event space downstairs is called the Eddy. Yeah. So, you know, all these little tongue-in-cheek terms and references to the river is intentional as well.
And I love that, and it points to a word that came up during our kind of walking tour, which is a sense of place, right? And so each of these rooms really seems to make it explicit and concrete that, like, you are in this very particular place in the country, right? And just out your window is a very special river, right? And everything that we do here is going to remind you of that.
Absolutely, and connect you to it. I hope, yeah. The place felt like the keyhole into, you know, why the business would succeed here, right? And so, you know, we chose a spot that was on the Greenway, river views, you know, the river's right out the door. And, you know, then from there, it's kind of connecting all these elements of Asheville that I love, that Joe loves. We have young families, the things that we do, we're on the Greenway with the family. We go paddleboarding right by here. And so just kind of understanding that, hey, you know, those are elements of Asheville that aren't shared enough, right? And we are an outdoor town, and this river is kind of the lifeblood of our town. So, you know, we wanted to create, you know, a lodging business that connected people to this place. And in doing so, you know, that's West Asheville, that's the French Broad River corridor, and then that's Asheville as a whole, right? So, I mean, we're under that kind of umbrella of Asheville. But, you know, I think one of the things that has been the biggest surprise is that the place actually really well represents both Joe and I. And, you know, we have known each other for a really long time, but we've known each other on a certain level. And so, it's been just, it's a testament to our friendship as we've gotten closer to better understanding each other and kind of knowing that, like, this river life is core to who he and I are.
Mm.
And now, you know, our business represents that. And, you know, the joke this morning, somebody saw us, he's like, what? Somebody pointed out, he's like, you guys are in Chacos and it's 40 degrees. Hey, we work on the river.
Yeah.
Man. We do what we want to do.
Yeah, these are my river shoes.
So I've got 2 seasons: Chaco season and shoe season.
And we're
It's
not,
not
in shoe
yet
season.
shoe season.
Heard. I love that, and I think core to who you are. I'm gonna try and run with that. Yeah, because, and I don't want to necessarily get into hospitality or tourism just yet.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that this is I'll call it a hotel for lack of a better term. We can define terms better later into this, but this is a boutique hotel concept, and so there's probably an assumption that this is not for Asheville. This is for other people who are going to come here, but that's not true, right? Like, so what has stood out to me as we did this tour and in the weeks leading up to this particular conversation is how, I want to say, well, you've been communicating that this is not meant to be for other people. This is for us, and please come use it. So could you talk a little bit about that as one of the tenets here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the community element of the project, and, you know, the whole 2-year, you know, idea to actualization where we are right now. I mean, all of that was built around community. You know, that's the community of friends and family that supported the idea. You know, I'd talk about like 3 things that kind of stitched it together. You know, it's there with the business idea. There's this vulnerability, there's trust, and there's community. You know, the vulnerability is the idea of taking the idea and putting it out there and putting it together. And then the trust is sharing it with your community, your friends and family, and, you know, asking them for their support and their trust and pushing it forward with you. So now it's not just you, it's this group pushing it forward. And then ultimately it's the community that's going to help you succeed. So we were fortunate, you know, we have a really big community, and as we kind of push this ball forward, you know, everyone from the contractor to our commercial real estate agent to our land planner, architect, are all kind of in this, you know, bigger family that is kind of the Wrong Way community. And now that we're open and we've transitioned from, you know, a construction project to a working business, the idea is that we want to continue to be a good community member. And we want to be a place for not just the East-West Asheville neighborhood to come down and grab a drink or a coffee, or just hang out and celebrate a birthday, but also everybody going down the Greenway. You know, we have food, we have a full coffee bar, beer, wine. So we want to be a place that's a pit stop off the Greenway. That was in our business model from day one. And, you know, we include everyone.
Yeah.
So there's never, it's all about everyone coming to be a part of this place and experience it, how it best fits them.
Yeah. We, you know, circling back on that term, sense of place, we made a lot of decisions on how to represent Asheville in Western North Carolina. The materials, the personality, the tone, the look and the feel, the design. But, you know, one element we didn't want to lose in that sense of place was the locals and the community and the people that are here in Asheville. I don't feel like you can give folks that come here from outside Western North Carolina a true sense of place if the people aren't there along with that experience. So, you know, making sure that we don't exclude the locals in the community from this experience while on property was really important, and giving the local community a reason to be here was a requirement. You know, you can't just hire community members to come hang out with your guests.
Extras.
Right. Yeah.
So we wanted to create a place where, you know, our local community wanted to come hang out, which is why we have, you know, what we feel is a really quality food and bev program, why we have the canteen with the comfortable, indoor and outdoor seating, these little nooks like the upper meadow and that green space, our yard, the campfires, making a really comfortable place for not only our guests, but the local community to come hang out. So you have those opportunities for those two sectors to kind of bump into each other. The locals to meet the guests and the guests to meet the locals and have that experience.
So I think that's the thing that you pointed out, where you can't experience Western North Carolina without meeting the people of Western North Carolina. I'll put a star on that. That sounds very, build that into the story if it's not already there. That's strong. Yeah. And then, so for the locals who are listening to this podcast, I think it could be worth talking about some of the look and feel. If you're not following their Instagram account, I would call it at this point almost a masterclass in, I didn't know your words at the time, but vulnerability, trust, community.
Right.
I've been watching Shelton, like, business owners make decisions for their business, and sometimes that decision is, I got to figure out how to make some, selfie videos, and this is not what I want to do, and I don't love this. But you've been doing it for years now, like telling this story of like, hey, dirt moved. Hey, like a foundation was laid. Hey, it rained again, and so we're not able to do anything, and this sucks, right? And you've been telling these stories so that when the doors did open, I like to say, like, if you build it, they will come is only true, or he will come is only true in Field of Dreams.
Right.
Everyone else needs to tell the story of building it. You have to be communicating that something's coming, so that people come. Let's talk about some of the things that people will see as they arrive. For me, one of my happiest, like, oh, that's amazing and cute, are these little taxidermy wooden critters. But there are so many little choices that have been made. Maybe talk through some of the things that locals will see, feel, experience when they come here, not as a guest necessarily, though I imagine staycations might be a big part of the push for locals.
Absolutely.
But just what they'd feel if they come to the coffee shop, want to sit in the lodge or spend some time on the property. Yeah. What would they see?
Well, you mentioned Ben Grant's wood sculptures. Ben is friends with Julian Harris. Shout out to Julian. He and I worked at the Wedge together. Julian's a talented craftsman himself. But Julian had gotten Ben to do tap handles for the Wedge. So these funky hands, and they were just stunningly ornate. The kind of thing where you like almost don't want to touch it to make the beer come out. You just want to look at it. So Ben I admired his work, and Joe and I were talking about Wrong Way, and we were talking about counterculture, and we were talking about that as it related to River Lodge, and it's this idea of like, all right, like, how can we be on the nose, but not make it the traditional River Lodge? And so we started talking about dead animals, and we both felt pretty strongly that we weren't going to put any dead animals in the lodge, but it needed something, and so we kind of played tennis with this idea of, what's funky? And then Ben's name came up, and then we went to Ben's shop, and, Ben was super gracious. He said, sure, I'll do something. And the first thing he came up with was this bear that has these snaggle teeth, and that's these kind of like eyes that are looking two different directions. And we were both just like, hell yeah. Make more of these.
It's got direct hits. I mean, they're just, everyone that I've noticed has been, it makes me smile. Like it's playful, and it also, like, you clearly, in my mind, I go, oh yeah, like taxidermy is a thing that would be in lodges, and this is the wrong way to do taxidermy. It's which is so much better than probably just period taxidermy, but like bad taxidermy is one of the weirdest, one of the most off-putting, right? Like, no one wants to be around particularly bad taxidermy. And so this is so far from that, that to me, I'm just like, oh my God, that's a 10 out of 10.
It's funny that we're spending this much time on carved animal heads, but I will say that, we engaged Ben really early in the process. Yeah. So early that we were still figuring out kind of our brand voice and what elements communicated that. And when we saw Ben's, kind of prototype carving of the bear, we said, that is exactly our brand. It's kind of not the right way to do animal heads on the lodge wall, but it's kind of goofy, kind of quirky, super playful.
Right.
You're looking at it going, I don't understand what's going on here. It's the same with our name.
Yeah.
You kind of look at it and you go, I don't understand. There's just layers, and there's discovery, and there's mystery to those animal heads, to our brand, and we think it just reinforces that type of thing.
It does, and it points to, and the reason why I've leaned so far into this is because it is just it's representative of all the other choices that I've heard you make.
Mm-hmm.
So while standing in the River Lodge and looking at these wood taxidermy concept pieces, you're standing on planed wood that was the trees that were on the property.
Yep.
Right. What else is going on in the River Lodge or on the grounds that are like little nuanced decisions that you made that might get lost, but are a part of this wrong way thesis?
Yeah. There's a ton of details, and Joe and I leaned heavy into everything, and the place I feel like has come out with a really cohesive look. But fun is part of what we want the overarching experience to be. So, inside of all of these structures, we wanted to make sure that there were fun, playful elements that you would enjoy while being on vacation or while you're just, stopping by to have a drink and hang out. The floors did come off the property. That's a process where we took the trees down, sent them to a mill. It takes about a year, and they saw them in the planks, and then the planks get dried.
Yeah.
Yep. And then they came back, and, just like everything in this project, we didn't quite have enough of a single species, so we did a mixed species floor, which is this kind of representation of the property itself, right? Thank you. Yeah, and then the other wood element that I'm super proud of is down in Old Fort, there's Camp Greer, and a friend of ours named Jason McDougall down there said that, hey, I've got all this wood. We just took down a horse barn. Any chance that you're interested in it? And I mean, at this point, I don't think we even pushed dirt yet, but we took it, put it underneath my deck at my house, and that ended up becoming every countertop on the property. So all 16 cabins have countertops that are reclaimed oak. Julian Harris did them in his shop about a mile from here, and then same with the bar downstairs. So that that connectivity where we're not only reusing a wood, right, that was milled in Western North Carolina, but it actually came from a camp. So, that felt really like a great connection point.
And they look beautiful. And so the textures in these lodges and the cabins themselves, for being as brand spanking new and beautifully designed and like thoughtful, there's also this, that wood, it's not like faux patina, right? Like that wood's seen some stuff, you can tell, and it adds to the overall character of the spaces. It's so clear.
Yeah, that was actually a difficult challenge to solve. Was we're creating this really new place, but we wanted the worn character, the kind of old feel to come through. So, one, we made sure that a lot of the materials was kind of a raw wood feel, but bringing in that reclaimed, repurposed wood that is, 60, 70 years old, was a very important element for us to bring that worn, that history, that, old personality into the space.
And then there's a ton of new that is like decidedly new, and then also old and plays with it. So in the spaces, I'm thinking of like these fellow kettles that are like, pinnacle of modern design concepts and minimalism. And we have a fellow kettle at our house, and every morning gives me life. And to go to a place that chooses to pay for a fellow kettle to be in all of the rooms is like, that's an indication of the type of business strategy and thesis that's going on in that space. And then there's a imagine brand new record players, but very vintage records,
Very vintage,
right? And very vintage books and very vintage carpets. And so like there is very modern,
right.
and maybe that's the Scandi in the Scandalapalach.
Ooh, man.
You know, I'm close. I'm not.
It took me months.
Scapalachian. Scapalachian.
You nailed
Took me
it.
months.
So maybe that's the Scandi, the clean, modern, new, and then this Appalachian, which is like worn, loved,
That's right.
cared for.
Right, with the history. Yeah, and I mean, you know, for the listeners that have not been here, please come check us out if you're in Western North Carolina or if you make a trip to Asheville. But if you're looking at all the cabins, you know, they have this brown pine siding that has what I hope feels like an already kind of aged, patinaed feel. So we were really intentional in taking, you know, brand new pine siding, nickel gap pine siding, and then treating it with this process, this all natural spray that basically, with the sunshine, immediately oxidizes the wood, and it brings out the different patinas in it. And then so all the cabins have kind of a worn feeling from the outside. And I mean, we're playing into a very wide open stereotype when we say that we have a cabin campground. Everybody's definition of cabin is a little bit different. So, you know, Joe was real big on kind of like, okay, what are the expectations, and then, you know, how does our design fulfill a certain element of those expectations, but it's still open-ended, and, you know, there's the curiosity of like, you know, I open the door, what does it look and feel like inside? And you know, your synopsis is A+. That's what we were going for.
Yeah, I mean, a word that we use a lot is juxtaposition. West Asheville,
right?
You know, we're, as Shelton mentioned, we're sandwiched in between a mountain climbing gym and a house heating oil distribution center. West Asheville is a community of juxtaposition. And we reflect that in our property too. You know, our amenity choices, our design choices, even the thing that we are, the urban cabin campground. We are not the campground that's 20 minutes outside in the middle of nature. We are on a road, you know, across the street from a river and a greenway. But, you know, we kind of your non-traditional campground for sure. And the reason for that is we wanted to be a gateway to not only outdoor activities, but also urban amenities. Right. So we're 1 mile from the River Arts District. We're 1 mile from Haywood Road. We're less than 3 miles from downtown Asheville, 2 miles from Biltmore Estate. You know, we're really accessible to so many reasons that people come to Asheville, but we're also right across the road from, you know, all these outdoor activities that people can access.
Yeah. Is it, I mean, am I right that this is the put-in here for most river activities?
Across from the climbing gym.
Across from the climbing gym.
There is a put-in or a takeout.
Or a takeout.
On which,
hey.
Which way you're heading.
Which to me, I mean, the location, and I want to get into some of the, I'll say like tactical, strategic, how did this actually happens in a moment or two.
Right.
Because the location seems crazy in the best way.
Right.
Like, how was this available? How did some commercial realtor not already try and turn it into condos? Right. So to attempt to put like a bow on look, feel, brand, and some of the, I'll just say brand things are the other things that come up for me is just how many, Shelton, you've done a great job of like shouting out local partners. I'll use the term, but there are a ton of local partners and a ton of like collaboration type decisions that have been made that also round out the brand. Do you want to talk about any other ones that we might not have touched yet?
That's a good question. I mean, I would just say, you know, Joe can think of who else we hadn't mentioned, but, you know, Asheville's just riddled with the most talented people, you know, and so in a lot of ways, it's an opportunity to showcase the people that are so talented in our town And that was one of the parts of the process that I enjoyed the most was, bringing these craftsmen, artists in and saying, hey, this is the idea. How do we execute it?
Yeah.
And they made it better.
And then experiences, right? So it's the things that are on the wall, it's the wood that's on the floor, but it's also how many alley-oops and pick and rolls you're doing with local other businesses.
Right. And just, so, Rosarina plants, they came in at 2 plants per cabin. That's an Instagram, but they're on Instagram. They have plants in different shops downtown, and you can buy them out of the shops, coffee shops and places like that. And then we used Lost Hunt Vintage to do all of our rugs. So they source 16, like you said, Persian rugs that are aged, they're old. So that again lends that kind of, worn character to the cabins. Who else, Joe? Earth Wind Records did our records for us.
There are hammocks and all. I was like, what is this chains for? And then out comes an hammock. Incredible.
Right.
Yeah.
Touch.
Yeah, I mean, a few partners that I'll highlight. One is our food program. That is done through a food partner called New Stock Pantry. They've got their own food studio in the River Arts District, but when we were trying to figure out how we were going to do food here in the River Lodge, there were so many elements that needed to be checked off that it was hard to put enough intention into such an important element. And we kind of lucked out with finding our food partner, New Stock Pantry. So they're a dynamic duo that actually are probably having a baby right about now.
Right.
Congrats.
Ashley Capps and Travis Schultz. She's a James Beard nominated semifinalist. She was with Buxton Hall as their pastry chef, but we were just so lucky to link up with them to provide food to our guests and locals. So, all of our sandwiches, salads, pastries in the morning.
All locally sourced ingredients.
It's kind of a seasonal element to it as well. But that's one partner. And then our experience program, with 1.8 acres, you can't do a lot of, a bunch of experiences on property. So we reached out to a lot of friends and companies that we knew that were really, really good in their particular domains, whether it be whitewater rafting or zip lining or tour operators, and curated a network of those partners and put them on our website so that our guests, as they're planning their stays, can link up with those experienced partners and feel hopefully confident that we've kind of done the selection for them.
Yeah.
And we want to lower the barriers that there might be to getting outdoors. That's one of our values. Yeah. And one of those barriers is just like the overwhelming number of providers and businesses that can get you on the river or on a greenway path, or so we've tried to do the selection process for our guests.
Yeah, I mean, you walk into certain places. I remember when Sarah, my wife, and I first came to Asheville. I'm like, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna do? And you look at the trifold stands of there's 1,000 things, and there's ghost lodges in Tennessee. I'm like, how is it? How close is Tennessee? Why is this here? And so to be able to lead, or at least cut down the field and have that touch, I'll call it concierge level of touch for your guests, does seem like a strong value add. I'm very excited about this space. I suspect that Sarah and I will do a staycation Riverside. Cool. Yeah. We gotta. I mean,
with or without the baby,
it's one thing to poke our heads in. It's another thing to spend a night. We've got to do quality control.
Yep.
I can't let these listeners think that this place is the best unless I've actually tested it. So expect that we'll do a staycation soon. Now, what else when it comes to brand? Do you feel like anything's been missed or is floating because I'd love to get into like practicality
Mm-hmm.
of turning dirt into 16 cabins.
I do want to mention one more thing that's kind of a a transition from that experience program into the brand. We tried to, beyond all those fun touristy things that you might do when you go on vacation. One element that I found was difficult to find here in Asheville was the idea that I'm vacationing in a place and I'm getting a lot of value from this place as a vacationer, but I have a desire, especially when I'm with my kids, to be an example to my kids. So, when we went to Mexico, we wanted to take an opportunity to clean up their beaches. So we spent a couple hours doing that. But we have an activity on our website alongside the whitewater rafting and the stand-up paddleboarding called Voluntourism. And so what we set up was essentially a means for our guests to sign up for this activity, and we connect them with local nonprofit organizations like Greenworks or Riverlink to do good in the community that they're vacationing in. So it might be a river cleanup or a stream cleanup or a road cleanup, just spending 2 to 3 hours doing good in a community that you're getting so much value from. And some people, they've got a very limited amount of time, so it might not make sense for those that are only here for a day, for instance. But folks that are here for 2, 3, 4 days, that are also able to do the whitewater rafting and stand-up paddleboarding, may want to set an example for their kids, or feel good about that vacation by doing a little bit of good in the community that they're vacationing in. And so we make that possible through that activity.
That sounds great. I give you a gold star, and I would love to know, because as I think about the way I've seen your brand communicated in the last couple months since opening, I'm kicking myself because it was in my notes and I did want to get there, is we're also open to locals, and we believe in voluntourism. And so those are two, to me, special things that I don't know many other, I'll call it hotel type businesses in town,
Right.
that are really trying to tell that story.
Right.
And that's a very special story. And so exciting. I remember seeing a post recently, because you pointed to kids staying with you, that you hosted like 70 something dogs in the last month.
Yeah.
So kids, dogs, voluntourism,
Yeah.
community, please come here. Those things all seem special to me. So hats off. Little hat tip. And then I mean, I have a million questions about, it's one thing to say, with a let me get the words right, with a brown liquor brainstorm. Guys, let me paint a picture. Let me paint a picture of urban cabin campground concept, and having people go, yeah, I mean, that sounds cool. You could do that. And then it's a very different thing to go under contract. It's a very different thing. I mean, I know very little about development, but there's, millions of dollars. So how did, from idea to to that pizza and beer,
Right.
talk about some of the major milestones that have to happen if someone's like, I want to turn dirt into a cabin concept in St. Louis. They're not going to do it here. You guys, this is it. But what happens? What are some milestones?
I mean, the first is convincing your family to let you do it, because you're putting everyone at risk and taking on this kind of financial liability. And Joe too, there's not much momentum, but there's a little bit. And then Joe's trust to come in and say, like, I'm going to shoulder this thing with you, and I think that we can do it. And that just continues with each kind of partner that's plugged into the process. But I took the Mountain BizWorks course 4 years ago, something
Shout out.
like that. Yeah, and I mean, it was really, the lady that was teaching the class said,
Am I right that this is the business model course that
Mhm.
they do? Okay.
yeah, just get the kind of ground level one.
Yep.
And she said, whatever concept you're writing down right now is not what you're going to open up. And she was right. I was working in the brewery at the time. We were going to put a restaurant in the brewery, and that was what I was working on. But just understand. I feel like the biggest, understanding what you don't know, and then being kind of mature enough to plug that hole with someone that's better than you that can make your project better.
Yeah.
Those were the big key bumps that kept this thing on the up and up. So a partner like Joe, we hired a financial advisor, a CFO for hire.
Cool.
Mark Goldstein, he came out of the Mountain BizWorks community too. He was referenced to us by Jeffrey Kaplan. Shout out to Jeffrey. Thank you for that key bump forward. But yeah, so just those people kind of plugging in and helping us build a model. The financial model was critical to telling the story and
Sure.
to then proving the viability. And so what we had, going under contract, we used that year that I was talking about to constantly refine how to build this, and then what are the costs associated with it. So every week we'd get a new set of costs, and we'd plug it in, and Mark would remodel everything. And it was ongoing, and it was a live process all the way till we closed the land, and then it kept evolving through construction. But having a financial person that was, I wouldn't say he was third party, but if Mark Goldstein, he only has one no bullshit attitude.
Yeah.
So we were always going to get it straight from Mark.
Yeah. And so and to kind of drill in on this, right? So in this year or so of diligence, it's not like necessarily you've paid for 2.2 acres. You're saying I want to buy it,
Right.
but like let's just check the EPA readings on the soil. I want to make sure they're great. And so there's a process. I have to do diligence. So it's not necessarily that money has changed hands yet. And in that time, you're building a model to validate that we can turn 2.2 acres into a thing over some timeline that won't bankrupt all of the families involved in making it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a early partnership with our general contractor, Ward Griffin, and Ward spent a lot of time with us in those early in that first year, and helped us assign value. What does it actually cost to build this thing? Because if you're off the mark on all that and you close on the land,
and a pandemic starts and prices double.
Yeah.
Good thing that didn't happen, huh?
Prices of plywood go up 82% or whatever, 5x, whatever it was. So like models are very important. And especially imagine, pre-signing or pre-money getting changing hands. How was this? So it seems like early partnerships, and Ward Griffin, I cut you off and I apologize. But you have a financial team player, you have a contractor who's going to be thinking more specifically about numbers and has experience attempting to forecast numbers. And then do you do like a fundraise to say, here's our most recent model. Right. We believe it's going to work. It'll take this long before we're cash flowing. It'll take this long before we pay off debt.
Right.
At any percentage, it'll take this long to be in the green. Like, how does it work in those early days?
You know how sometimes what you don't want, and then you're able to use that to define what it is you want.
Yeah.
So, I've been involved in a lot of small businesses. That's my background. And I knew that I didn't want long-term investors for perpetuity.
Good.
So in working with Mark from the beginning, we built a model that flips over in 3 years. Our debt flips over in 3 years. So we knew that, okay, we're going to go out and raise money, and we're going to pay our investors X return, and it needs to be pretty high because we're then going to tell those investors up front that they get bought out at the end of year 3.
Cool.
And then Joe and I assume that mountain of debt between the two of us.
Wow.
And I will say that evolution is a good term for all this because, there were a lot of kind of ideas on how we were going to approach some of those big rocks, whether it be funding or construction or operating, that just got flipped on their head. With COVID, the reality of COVID and post-COVID construction environment, lending environment, we went into it thinking traditional banks, traditional loans would be available to us, and that just dried up. The lending landscape changed massively. Overnight. The materials volatility was a real challenge. Construction labor environment was huge really headache. Volatile.
Yep.
So having that community of super capable professionals was key. It is a miracle that we are here with an executed vision, a built campground that we are now operating. When I look back at all the challenges, especially the post-COVID, environment that was created, we could spend hours and hours on what all those things were, but really it was about adapting to all those realities and figuring out a new way forward. But we didn't do that just Shelton and I.
Right.
We had some really capable folks that were there along for the ride that helped us figure it out.
It's that idea of, surround yourself with people that are better than you and then rise to their level, right? So at every head of different elements of this project were really sophisticated people that had a tremendous amount of experience. I mean, Ward Griffin has built apartment complexes. He has built houses. He's built hotels, all in his portfolio. And so, when we hit these just kind of garbage fire moments, we had calm, cool heads that were like, okay, hold on, let's figure out how to do this. I mean, the plywood volatility, crazy, right? But Ward had locked us in with what's called a SIPS panel company out of Arkansas. And so all our cabins were drawn by Brent Campbell here in town, and then they were engineered as a panelized cabin kit that we designed. So it's all custom, but it was cut in a warehouse, so there's minimal waste. And then these SIPS panels are plywood, styrene foam that's 4 to 6 inches thick, and then another piece of plywood. And they all come in on a tractor trailer, and they're erected on site and allows you to dry in really quickly and be extremely efficient. Well, Joe and I didn't know what we were doing on that sense, but Ward had locked us in with these guys, and when the plywood prices went sky high, they had mountains of plywood, and our prices with them held, but they didn't increase. And that was just a lucky spot. I mean, we had some unlucky spots too.
Sure. It's hard, it's hard to say that Ward had like COVID environment experience, so he knew what it was just that we were making good choices as a group.
Correct.
That allowed us to weather an unprecedented storm.
Yeah.
And some of those moments were luck. Some of them were just being able to adapt to the situation and find a better way forward. But I feel blessed that we had that community that helped us through that, and just boggles my mind that we were able to get through it.
It seems like on the fly problem solving is now probably a superpower of y'all's, whether or not it was before this started.
Yeah, I mean, picking this one as project number one,
right?
We could have picked an easier one to pull off.
Sure. and so I look out the window and I'm looking at these giant retaining walls, and I'm thinking, clearly you had experts and a team around you that were super smart about it. How, when folks say, I want to be an entrepreneur, the fastest way to that is in service businesses, and that's where my mind is very comfortable, right? Because it's just all you have to do is have someone say, yeah, you can do that, and then you start building their website or whatever. Like work in the cloud, work on the computer, and be in service, and there is no barrier to starting,
right?
More or less. identifying land, getting it under contract, fundraising to be able to buy it, fundraising to be able to build. That's again complex. I said three-dimensional chess earlier. How, when thinking about that, right? So I very excited to hear about this 3-year milestone to pay back investors and flip I guess the debt on your overall bank loans into just your name. Are there what at a high level, what is the process? So to me, my guess is identify the land. Land has value. Call it $1 million. Call it, let's just for round numbers,
Right.
$1 million. You need to put some percent down. Or wait, no, when you buy land, there's no debt. You can't take debt on to buy land. Or there's no bank. Like when you buy a house, you can put 5% down, 20% down. You buy the house and the land. When you're just buying dirt, I think isn't that a cash?
No, you can get a loan on against the dirt, but there's a ratio. Yeah.
Got it.
I mean, we have 4 stacks to our debt stack, right? And so we have, we got an initial what we called subordinated debt loan, and that gave us enough money to buy the land.
Okay.
And then we, like Joe said, traditional lending had dried up, so we actually worked with a local lender called Alfie.
Cool.
John Sarver and Todd Fowler, shout out to them. They were anchors in kind of holding this whole thing together. And so they gave us an initial loan to buy the land, and then we used that to start the fundraising process. And that's Mark's model, which is 30-some pages of all of the numbers, and then a really big, pitch deck. It's not really a pitch deck. It's more of a business plan.
Sure.
Yeah, business plan.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say for those out there that are considering, going down this path, it's make sure that you have somebody with the financial chops that is in an adjacent or similar field.
Yeah.
Because kind of building that investment deal, it was pretty complicated.
Seems sophisticated.
Yeah. Really, very sophisticated.
So, Mark had a lot of experience in real estate deals, which is essentially what we put together for our investors.
Apartments, condos, so the whole, multiple unit
and trying to for vacancy assumptions
all
and
that. Correct.
Seasonality on pricing and bumping and like being able to model and forecast all that just sounds incredibly complex. And so the tradition, I'm imagining there's traditional debt that is like bank type debt,
correct,
longer term debt vehicles, and then this 3-year window, is that for all of the non-traditional investment or investors? So like I'll call it family members or wealthy local folks who are like, you can put this money to work and pay me back.
Yeah, they all get turned over in between 3, at the end of 3, before the end of 4.
Okay.
So that's the way we built the model. So we had, we got to the place where we're now fundraising. So we went out to the community, new concept, and that kind of meant that there wasn't any one person that underwrote the whole deal. We have a lot of investors.
Yeah.
That's the community element that I was talking about. And once we hit a certain number with our investors, we then were able to go back to Alfie and say, we need this size construction loan.
Cool.
And it was all coming together. And at the very end, Alfie said, we want you guys to have, a couple $100,000 more in contingency money, more than what we had allotted for. And, our Mountain BizWorks connections paid off, and Mountain BizWorks actually ended up being, the
final check, so to speak,
or like the chink loan. You're stacking a bunch of rocks and you stick that one rock in that steadies everything else out. And so Mountain BizWorks plugged in. Mark's connected to them, and I had taken their class, and they made the final loan to us, and with all of that, everything funded. And then we had to build it on budget. Build it on budget,
build it on a timeline, right? Because the clock starts to tick, right? The metaphor I've used sometimes, maybe not on the podcast, is like you lit a fuse. At that point, fuse is lit.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
and there's a timeline, and there are assumptions, and you're already in, like, fingers crossed, the worst of times, right? Like, it can't be worse than right now. Hopefully by the time that, we've constructed, people, are shaking hands still, or I've jokingly said, not totally fearful of mouth breathers. And so how is stress showing up with debt? A metaphor that I've used is that debt is like a fire, and if you control that fire, you get to do some beautiful things. You warm a house, you cook some food, and then there's like California, right? And so there were forest fires. And so how are your relationships with debt? How are your relationships with your, I'll say, investors? I mean, this is probably feeling a hair honeymoony in terms of where the timeline is. Did you hit construction timelines? Are you is the model even close to representing reality at this point, a couple years in from probably the first time a model was drafted?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of buts. We were probably, from the point that we created the first model and timeline, I think we were probably 3 months off of that, which is really, really good.
Exceptionally good. When you think of how long highways take to get built, and any project is double the timeline. So 3 months is, you're still, like, you might be on the border, but you hit a bullseye.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost a 20.
Man, I would love to say that, oh, well, you just start fundraising here and you start developing here. The honest answer is, looking back, we probably started fundraising and taking money in a little bit earlier than we wanted to, because we weren't able to start using that money until much later. So we had that money taken in, sitting in a bank, and that time spent in the bank is going to have to get repaid.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
We weren't able to put it to work as quickly as we wanted to. But there's so many factors involved. It could have gone wrong, and then the people that said, I will give you money, won't be around, and you haven't taken their money, so you got to find somebody else. So there's so many factors involved that it's hard to, in hindsight, say that we should have done it a different way.
Sure.
And it's hard for me to say to anyone out there, this is the way you should do it. I can only say that in hindsight, we had some money sitting around that wasn't working for us, but I don't know if I would have done it a different way.
So I don't know that we could have done it a different way. Because we're new. We're just not a concept that's proven. We're not ex-hoteliers that have moved over to disrupt the hotel market. We're river guides, right? Just like the press sheet says.
So there's a relatively true metaphor in, like, the startup space, which is raise money whenever you can raise money. Right. And so if it's early, it's early. It's way better than late. Right. Late is a different type of stress. And so what I find particularly interesting is that there are ways to inject money, capital, into businesses that are dilutive, right? So that's equity, right? So you're giving people shares of ownership for their money today. And then there's debt financing, right? So money comes in today and you owe interest over some timeline, some horizon. And so it's very interesting to me that your model doesn't seem dilutive. And I would have assumed that you all had like 20 hidden partners who are silent owners and are going to be tied to it for a long time. And to me, that is like, Shelton, you kind of pointed towards this. That sounds like it could be rough, right? Because then you have, partner M has a family emergency, all of a sudden needs the money to come out, or doesn't sound like a great investor. But when you need to raise money, any investor is a decent investor, and so you have now a bunch of not perfectly aligned interests.
Right.
And so the ability to raise money using both debt and what I imagine is equity today with the like buyout, so they lose their equity when you pay them back, is a really exciting model.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that, for people out there that are trying to start a business, know that Asheville has a great startup culture. And then we have a bunch of tools, right?
Yeah.
There are mentors, programs with Mountain BizWorks that pertain to very specific industries. And you can go, work with a mentor and develop your concept. And, at some point you just got to push off and say, fuck it. I mean, I think Joe and I were kind of in this, it's an oxymoron because we're older, like we're both in our 40s, we have families, so to push off and say that at this point in life is risky. But I think what each of us would answer independently is that we also are at a point in life where we didn't want to continue down the path that we were going down, and this opportunity wasn't just real, it was something that made my heart sing. So, I want to wake up every day and put my chacos on and walk out in the 40-degree cold and go to my river lodge.
So I love that. So let's talk then about like the practicalities of running this place, right? So we went from fundraising concept. We sort of talked about the highs and lows of building and developing.
Right.
You use the term hotelier, which I believe is French for someone who runs hotels and or owns. And so
you guys lost me.
Yeah. So if this isn't a hotel, it's hotel adjacent.
Right.
Operating a single unit Airbnb, you mentioned, is parts of the background.
Right.
Seems like a whole different stratosphere of an operational burden of a day to day. What is it in these early months of owning and operating and having the doors open, the lights on, come on in, people, you can book? What are we seeing as, say, the day to day or operationally the biggest burdens or most, I'd say maybe surprising, the things that are standing out in these early days?
Yeah, I mean, it's the things that aren't as sexy as talking
sure.
about a startup business and Scapalachin. But it's things like, laundry and cleaning 16 units and integrating cleaning with your property management system, and how do we get these door lock codes to automate so that we don't have to set up door lock codes for every single guest that checks in.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm going to double click immediately and just jump in. So a couple things that stood out is you have smart locks, right? That's awesome. That seems almost like you need it at this point when you're running anything that looks like a external entrance version of a hotel. So
Right.
Airbnb or cabins, right?
Yep. Yeah, and we go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what technology? So that's Yale, which is sort of August, but probably the owner, right? So what technologies are important? So you talked about property management, and I'll throw the asterisk slash parentheses of what technologies have been most critical, and the thing that stands out to me is like green both in your building and green in your operations. And so it's not just that you're solving for these operational problems, but you're also trying to do the best version of a solution for these operational problems.
Right.
So that's the nuance that if you want to play with, I'd love to hear. But what tools are showing up? What is your booking software?
It's a company called New Book. Ironically, maybe they're out of Australia.
Australia.
Oh yeah, where Arnold Schwarzenegger is from.
What?
But we knew that the property management system was going to be the backbone of our operation. So I spent a lot of time going through the selection process there. I collected 22 potential candidates that were in our cost category,
You demoed
went
them all?
through an RFI, we narrowed it down to 18, then took 4 through a legit RFP, and then selected the best one of those 4. And, we are still learning and growing with that system because it's got a ton of features. So the learning curve is a long one,
Sure.
but it will allow us to grow as we bring in those other features. So now we have hooks into our property management system with our point of sale system, with our door lock and security system, with our QuickBooks. So, we tried to, as much as possible, make sure that we were efficient with our operations, or at least set up the platforms that would allow us to get there at some point in the future. One thing that was really important to us is that we were able to operate with a minimal amount of staff, because I know that typically your operational overhead is about 75% labor, and it should be. If you're going to bring on staff, you want to pay them right. But we wanted to focus on the guest experience, on operations, and we wanted to have a small team that was really, really good at their jobs. That meant we had to have the technology and the systems that allowed us to operate efficiently.
Yeah, tons of automation.
Right.
So
It's not, but not technology forward. Like, we didn't want technology to be part of the guest experience.
So that's the sustainability / asterisk part of the brand experience, right? Like, you have these analog light switches in the room. You have the analog record players, and then how do you do these things that are tech forward and smart and efficient and automated without all of a sudden sending push notifications or certain levels of we're in the future and this is a Google complex.
And we didn't want to get too far afield from the idea that we're a campground and want to have the personality of a campground. So if you're, always kind of interacting with technology versus a person, or the analog experience elements in your cabin, then you're taken away from that campground, that camp feeling. So as much as possible, we made sure that the technology was hidden from the guest, but it, kind of greased the experience wheels, so to speak. Wasn't thrown in their face.
And one footnote to that, from a startup standpoint, Joe picked that software, selected it, implemented it way ahead of us opening, and we were actually able to capture revenue before we opened. So, when we did open in August, which was behind schedule, we had bookings on the books, and that meant we had dollars in the bank that we had captured from those bookings, and that helped us kind of step off the ship with momentum.
Yeah, for sure.
Or push off with momentum.
And even more valuable than revenue, those startups, what they value is learnings. And so we implemented, I think, November of 2021, and we didn't open our doors until August of 2022. So we had that period of time that we were able to learn how our system worked, and
without
did the bookings.
Without the risk of a bad check-in experience, without the risk of all of those things that make the review anything short of a 5-star, right? And if you have, an email automation that's maybe not exactly where it is today at post-booking, you still get the delight the customer when they're here versus in their inbox 2 seconds after booking, right? Like you can optimize some of those things later, but there is no second time that they walk in from the cabin, or second time that they walk in the lodge. Those things kind of want to hit it right in August when they show up.
Absolutely. And I mean, so we, in general, we had a presence and a website, a booking engine all set up going into opening. And, I think that actually helped us hire people as well. So, the people that work here have done a tremendous job adapting with us as we uncover all these did not know situations, right? And they've helped us kind of create solutions.
Yeah.
And I couldn't be more grateful for our team that's helped us this past. We're going on 8 weeks now, 2 months.
Yeah, I think if we were gonna kind of give any shout outs that are really, really important to our success beyond the ones that we've already thrown out there, our families, I'll speak for myself, but the startup life is not for anyone, especially those with a young family. So my wife and my kids have been super, super supportive and understanding. So wouldn't be here without them. And then our staff as well, as Shelton mentioned. When I was interviewing, I think the term I used just to set expectations is it's going to be a shit show. The first X now a number of months is going to be super chaotic as we figure out things. You're not going to have the path laid out in front of you. There is no operations manual. We're going to be writing it as we go. We don't want to put anything in stone because we're going to be changing things, daily, weekly. So not only do we have to be adaptable as business owners, and we want to be, we own the business, but we have to ask our staff to be adaptable as well.
Yeah.
And they've been amazing at that, and they've contributed a ton to us being able to, build or operate something.
Elevated our customer service a ton.
Yeah. I mean, all you have to do is look on our Google reviews.
Yeah.
And see how many comments talk about staff.
Wow.
And, that was not trained.
Sure.
We did not have time to train these people.
Right.
Excellent customer service.
Yeah.
We put values, mission, vision in front of them. It was like one slide. Be a guide is our biggest value. And that one value kind of set the tone for our customer experience.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. We had a couple come in weekday. They were staying in cabin 16, older. They came in the lodge and they asked, about doing something that particular day. And of course, we're all just effusive. Like we're just spouting out, you got to do this and you got to do that, and there are a couple things that resonated with them. And, I was talking to them. It was me and Katie that you met downstairs. And they said, gosh, that all sounds great, but I'll never remember it. And Katie just looks up and says, I just wrote it all down for you. Yeah. I mean, that's a small touch, but that they took the Post-it away and they did the things on the list.
Yeah.
And improved their experience.
I love that. So a thought that's coming up for me is, you mentioned how this is a hard first business, right? So I imagine there is a desire to want to have things be perfect, right? We did a little bit of a walking tour, and I look in these rooms and I go, wow. And then I see your eyes and I go, oh, okay. And I noticed that you noticed that it might not be perfect at every point, but to me it was, right? And so where and how have you, it seems like you're giving a lot of autonomy to your team that you've built. But have you had any difficulty saying, not being the person who makes every decision for every single detail all of the time? Like this could be like the baby, the first child. No. I have my baby's with a babysitter for the first time. It's been a year.
Right.
You giving ownership and responsibility to team when the stakes feel particularly high and the debt's going to be yours, right? How, is there any kind of mottos that you're telling yourself? Is there any lessons there?
I think we've been training for that moment ever since we became partners together.
Yeah.
When you are business partners and you're relying on someone else to help make the decisions. True, Shelton and I are very complementary in that we have different skills and personalities and desires on where to focus. So that's pretty helpful and critical, I think, for a partnership. But it takes a lot of trust as well. And so by the point that we had to trust staff to make some of those decisions and use their judgment, I think we'd already had, a year and a half or so of being partners where we did very similar kind of I trust you, you trust me moments.
Yeah, $1 million trust falls, right?
Yeah. And I took a note on it, vulnerability, trust, community.
Right.
And so vulnerability might sound like, hey, we don't know all the answers. We don't have all the answers. We don't have a onboarding process for you. You're going to need to learn a lot on your own. We're going to trust you to make some decisions on behalf of the team and the organization, and we're going to get through it together. Community.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean that sounds very similar in the startup life. Like, when I started with the healthcare services company 20 something years ago, it was a little startup. And it was exciting. It was chaotic. The owners had a lot of trust in their employees to make those judgment calls. But then, when I don't know the business was sold or whatever, the employees got some benefit from that, and so there's this bidirectional trust with our employees as well. We have to trust them, but they have to trust us that we're going to get through this startup moment. And if they follow along in this journey and kind of go through the challenges of those chaotic moments, there's going to be some benefit on the back end, and it's going to be one hell of a ride as we go through it.
Yeah.
It's going to be some rapids. River guides.
Yeah, and I think you get to the place. Well, I personally got to the place at the end of construction where, I was obliterated, and it ending and transitioning to an operational business was a very emotional moment for me, and I think the big trigger for the emotion was the letting go, right? Like, okay, as the partner relationship, I was the point person for construction, and it took a lot out of me, but I felt like, we got it across the finish line. We're open, and there, this big release. And it's like, holy shit, man, we got all these people now. Joe kept saying, let somebody else do it. I was like, oh my God, we can let somebody else do it. Great idea.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of this big swell that we've been riding as we've been open, I feel like, is all these hands, improving it. Like our staff's been working on signage for the property.
And wayfinding, you mentioned.
Yeah, it looks amazing.
Yeah. So, to kind of circle this section, it started with tools, right? The tools that I heard that are mission critical here is something called New Book, QuickBooks,
right?
Yale locks as the doors.
Right.
Probably the internet, right, on the land. We talked about how it's fiber, so work remote folk could come here, stay in a cabin, crush some Zoom calls, and then go out on the river if they wanted to.
Right.
Any other technologies, tools, resources that aren't humans that have been mission critical?
Point of sale is a big one.
What do you use for that?
A Clover.
Clover, yeah.
And we selected it again because it integrates with our property management system.
Okay.
Right.
So, I think the underlined point there is that the foundational technology that you use for things that might be or rhyme with the database is mission critical, right?
Correct.
The limits that technology choice imparts on your business is at some point going to be a big deal. And so like in website choice, right, depending on who you are and what business that you're building, Squarespace is great if you're a yoga instructor.
Right.
Typically not great if you want to sell products at scale or have a bunch of SKUs on products, right? Like there's a service business, you go here, you go over here, because the rails eventually are a limiter.
Right.
And so I think the takeaway on this new book is that diligence on what's going to be the core database
Absolutely.
that everything else plugs into is essential.
Yeah,
It's critical.
I mean, I'll admit, here's my vulnerability: is we don't know all the benefits that we're going to get from a system like New Book, but knowing that it has a lot of the features that allow us to scale, and allow us to integrate with other technology partners means that I'm not handcuffed 2 years from now because we didn't choose something that integrates with our other technology partners.
Yeah. And technology rip-outs are
painful,
brutal.
Yeah,
Brutal to start over. Yeah.
And, there are some things that not necessarily technology, but sustainability, infrastructure items that we set placeholders for that we'll add in the future. So this building that we're sitting in is teed up for solar.
Cool.
It's all on the wall. It's stubbed out through the roof. We're what's called solar ready. And, when our business allows for it, we'll add solar panels. It'll produce something just under 20 kilowatts.
There you go.
So, it's just, and another sustainability element is we stubbed up in the parking lot for EV charging.
Cool.
Well, that's coming, right?
Yeah.
It's here, but for us, it's forthcoming. But we knew that we didn't have the bandwidth to pull it off. It wasn't critical to getting our doors open, but the infrastructure's there to add in the future.
Very thoughtful. Awesome. Any other technologies to send out? Clover for point of sale?
You mentioned internet, so we made the conscious decision not to include TVs in any of our units.
Love it.
Again, one of the decisions we made to minimize the barriers to people getting outside and enjoying the outdoors, but the trade-off was having super high-speed internet, from just about any point on the property.
Right.
So every cabin has a wireless access point. The meadow has a wireless access point. You can go anywhere on the property and never lose a signal, if you're walking around with your laptop.
Right.
And that network, that Wi-Fi network, is delivered through fiber optic cabling under your feet. Again, hidden technology. But if you're someone that is either doing a staycation or, remote work, or we love to host, staff retreats and corporate events, they're not having to go to a coffee shop or get off property just to get some work done.
Yeah. No hotspots necessary to run your business out of here, which is special and important in 2022, 2023.
Yeah.
And then,
well, I was just gonna say, we're actively looking for business retreats and work groups and work travelers that want to stay with us during the week. Our weekday rates are lower than our weekend rates. if you're listening,
always selling.
Heard.
Steele.
All right, heard. And so that's the tech, that's the people, and then you pointed towards something, and I want to potentially attempt to wrap up here or hereabouts. Long-term vision, right? So we know that there's a 3 to 4 year milestone where we're going to try and return capital to normal investors, take on the debt personally through the business. Is this riding off into the sunset type of future for you? Is this one of many you're going to go out to Telluride, do it again? Like, what is the longer term vision here? I'm very interested to know.
Yes. We do want to do it again. We built a parent company called All Forward Outdoors, and that's an outdoor hospitality business that this being wrong way fits up underneath. And then the intention is that we will go build more, urban campgrounds, and they'll fit up underneath All Forward Outdoors. So we're actively seeking new sites. If you have one, reach out. But Joe and I've talked recently about that next property and what does it look like, and how much personal bandwidth do we have to hit go again and do this particular project all over, again, somewhere else that's not, I literally live 5 minutes from here, 5 minutes from my house, you know?
Yeah. Those are big questions.
They're big questions. And I think, you know, we're learning a lot operating this, and it's helping us define kind of what the next property is going to be.
Yeah, you know, we have made some kind of networking decisions, because, you know, kind of operating a lodging hospitality business is new for us, but we typically will not show up at lodging and hospitality conferences. We're more likely to show up at outdoor industry conferences and networks. So Outdoor Gear Builders is a business network that we participate in. They're a great partner. And also Mountain BizWorks and Made by Mountains. You know, they're starting an initiative to grow the outdoor economy, and we want to be along for that ride, and we want to shape what lodging and hospitality looks like in Western North Carolina in the future. I think they are a vehicle, and we want to be along for the ride, and we want to be part of the conversation. So the idea of an urban cabin campground, I feel, has some legs. It's not done a lot for, you know, there's a lot of reasons for that, but we feel like it's something new that can get more people outdoors that wouldn't typically find themselves getting outdoors.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we can do that in other towns besides Asheville here in Western North Carolina, it's absolutely something we want to do.
All the towns in Western North Carolina, or a lot of them, have this DNA, you know, where they are on the Tuckasegee River, they're on, you know, a river, and they have the town is built around the outdoors, you know. And I think what Made by Mountains is trying to do is shine a light on that. And, you know, a lot of towns, Old Fort's a great example, you know, it was a mill town, and the mill no longer is the driving economy, but oh, wait a second, we're connected to 110,000 acres of, you know, Grandfather Mountain District of Pisgah. That's a resource.
Sure. Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking, oh, Old Fort. I have very little experience in Old Fort, but I do know that Old Fort sounds like potentially the next step, or an example of what could be a good, you know, V 2.0. Mm-hmm. So that's super exciting. I can see that. My energy was like, ooh, where else, when else, how far?
Do we got another couple hours?
Right. And then you also pointed towards the idea of like the startup culture. And I'm just wondering, is there, in terms of equity, in terms of exits, right? So it's one thing to scale and grow another one. As you build a team, right, and as you potentially think about replicating the model, is there I'm really interested that there's a holding company on top of it.
Right.
So structurally, that's a light bulb thing for me. I'm like, this is cool. I should have asked that earlier. Mm-hmm. Structurally, are there, maybe the word is warrants, or is there some partitioned area of ownership in Wrong Way and or the holding company on top of it, and or some side business or other business inside of the entities that will be for employee share ownership? Or is this not a thing where you think there's an exit to Hilton 20 years from now where everybody gets rich?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the future is going to hold for an exit for Wrong Way. It was kind of like selecting technology. Just make sure that you put the structure in place, so that you're positioned so that you can do that. So our organizational structure is kind of a nod to that. We've got the holding company. We've got a management LLC that is, you know, the entity that is, you know, the main entity that manages Wrong Way as an LLC. And the main reason for that is that it doesn't complicate property number 2 and property number 3. The investors in Wrong Way are the investors in Wrong Way, and if we went for number 2, you know, we could separate that, and that protects the investors in here. It doesn't prevent us from moving fast on property number 2, but there's still a level of trust.
Right.
Like, we've got this investment group, and if property number 2 is a great opportunity and they want to go along for the ride again, then, that's a pool that we're going to tap first.
Yeah.
And give them that opportunity. And we've proven that we can make it happen with property number 1.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Place exists.
Yeah.
Check. That's
Yeah.
better than a lot of things. A lot of businesses and software, let's say, never get out of beta, never get out of the idea and iteration phase. And we are sitting in the boardroom.
Right.
This place is real, and there are guests downstairs.
Yeah,
and that's incredible.
I can't emphasize enough like how just amazing it is that we're here. But also now looking back, my wife, we were at like an outdoor Halloween haunted farm, and she's looking around. There's all these people, like hundreds of people. She's like, why didn't we come up with this idea first? I was like, an idea. Everybody has an idea.
Yeah.
And it is 10% of making a business real. The 90% of execution is so difficult, and it could go wrong 1,000 different ways.
Right.
So anybody can have an idea. That does not make a new business. It's so easy to come up with a new idea. So the fact that we were able to bring it from new idea into a real thing, I feel really blessed. And, that community that have helped us make it into a real thing, can't thank them enough for that.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, listeners far and wide, thank you. I mean, yeah, you are making it, and I'm hitting it there because that community has helped you make it. We're gonna land this plane. A couple things I want to quickly shout out. If you made it to these cheap seats, please stand by, join our email list, and or follow us on Instagram, because we are back in that getting humans back together world of that I dreamt of when thinking about making it in Asheville. And so our next event will be here at the Wrong Way Riverside Lodging Cabins. And so there are some details that we're going to be ironing out. Capacity should not be a problem, but weather depending could be. And so stand by. Don't just show up. RSVP so I can help the team here know exactly how many people we're going to get together for that event. You'll see that on makingitinashville.com. Thank you for making it all the way to the back of this episode. There will be links everywhere, but just in case, how might the listeners find you if they wanted to type it in themselves, either into a website or to Instagram or whatever platforms you care about?
Wrongwaycampground.com, at Wrongway Campground on Instagram and Facebook, and at Wrongway Campground on.
Oh, we're everywhere.
Damn near everything else.
Yeah, we got.
You guys are hot in TikTok.
We got. I mean, we're nascent.
Sure.
TikTok, Pinterest. We're all over the place.
Yep.
We just, content is hard. So
find us on the Googler.
Yeah, check out Google Maps. If you don't know where this is, definitely check out Google Maps. But it is worth a visit if you're going to be in town for a night, or if you're going to be in town forever because you live here. Come check it out. Thank you both so much for the time today and for going deep on some of these business questions outside of the brand. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun.
Tony, it's everything.
We've come so far. We've come so far.
I loved it, man. Thank you so much for the conversation.
It was a privilege.